The story begins with a weapon designed to disappear into the sea, not return from it. Yet on a cold night in the mid-Atlantic in 1943, a U.S. Navy destroyer watched the impossible unfold. A live torpedo, its own, surfaced out of the dark and carved a perfect wake back toward the ship that had launched it. The crew believed they were moments from being erased by their own shot. But what happened next would enter naval intelligence files as one of the strangest events of the Second World War. Because when the torpedo was finally recovered, its ruined casing held something no one expected. Bearings and coordinates pointing not toward the destroyer, but toward a German submarine that had never been detected. The incident would be buried in post-action reports, classified and dismissed by senior officers as a mechanical malfunction. Yet the men who saw it unfold knew the truth felt different. Something about the path, the timing, the precision, none of it aligned with a simple failure. And for months afterward, naval analysts would quietly review gyroscope data, sonar logs, and intercept reports, trying to understand how a returning torpedo could bring back the position of an enemy it never should have found. On the destroyer's deck, the night had begun normally. The crew stood ready at the tubes, automatic routines guiding every action. Torpedo preparation during World War II was ritualistic. Unlock, check seals, verify gyro angle, consult the fire control officer, call the range. These men had done it hundreds of times. The tubes gleamed with cold steel under the weak red deck lights, and the ocean ahead was a long strip of darkness broken only by foam. No one imagined the torpedo they were about to send would come back. The gyroscope mechanism, the heart of any WWII torpedo, was calibrated carefully that night. A destroyer's speed, bearing, and pitch were factored in, and then the weapon was released. When it left the tube, it behaved exactly as it should. The crew saw the familiar white wake angled properly, driving straight toward where a sonar contact might have been. Then it was gone. Down in the sonar room, operators listened into the void. These men lived within headphones and dim lamps, trained to parse faint echoes through static. The Atlantic was unforgiving. Temperature layers, currents, and storms twisted sound unpredictably. But that night they heard something. A brief buzz, a deviation, a sound not quite matching an ordinary torpedo track. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. Above deck, sailors peered into the waves, searching for the fountain of spray that marked a distant detonation. Nothing came. And then a lookout shouted, a white line on the water, but wrong. Moving toward them. Fast. Chaos erupted. Emergency orders, hard rudder, engines roaring. Men grabbing railings as the deck heeled sharply. A returning torpedo was every destroyer crew's nightmare. A single impact would crack the ship open like a shell. But the torpedo did not strike. Instead, in the last 50 yards, it dipped, lost speed, turned slightly, as if its power unit was dying, and then bobbed to the surface like a gutted fish. The destroyer circled it cautiously. A boat was lowered. The weapon was hauled aboard. The casing was cracked, the nose cone damaged. But the gyroscope compartment, the one part of a WWII torpedo built to survive shock, was intact. And inside it, marked in grease pencil, were not the firing settings the crew had entered before launch, but updated coordinates. Bearings that matched nothing they had plotted that night. In the map room, officers pored over them. A point in the ocean, seemingly random. Yet when compared with signals intelligence reports from the days prior, the location aligned eerily well with the last known transmission of a German U-boat believed to be hunting in the area. The officers looked at one another. It was impossible, or at least it should have been. The destroyed casing was later photographed. The images show a jagged hull, wiring twisted by salt water and pressure, but the gyro cage remained pristine. Records from the period indicate that the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance reviewed the data and quietly filed it under mechanical anomaly, though several engineers added handwritten notes suggesting the torpedo might have followed a magnetic irregularity or intercepted another sound source mid-run. But those explanations did not satisfy the destroyer's crew, and when intelligence teams matched the torpedo's returned coordinates to U-boat intercept reports, they began to wonder whether the weapon had crossed the wake of a submarine operating in radio silence. Maybe the torpedo had detected the engine rhythm of a submerged boat. Maybe it turned, and maybe the temporary failure that caused it to rise and slow had inadvertently preserved that new trajectory in the gyro data. The destroyer moved at flank speed toward the bearing indicated. The night sea widened into a dark frontier of risk and possibility. The captain ordered full sonar sweeps. Operators pulsed the water with disciplined precision. Echoes returned, some empty, some distorted, one faint but promising. The horizon ahead was black and quiet, but the tension on the bridge felt razor-thin. The charts used that night remain in archives, pencil marks, grease strokes bearing lines crossing the page. At 0300 hours, the captain wrote his entry. Unusual torpedo event. Possible contact at coordinates indicated by gyro readout. Proceeding to investigate. By dawn, reconnaissance patterns were underway. Sweeps across a grid narrowed by the torpedo's impossible clue. Hours later, a report was logged. An oil slick, faint but fresh. Debris likely from a submarine's exhaust casing. No hull found, no survivors. And that is where the official story ends. But the recovered torpedo's gyro data was copied into a declassified naval tech report years later. The conclusion was simple, almost evasive. Irregular run, source unknown. Yet the implication lingered. A weapon meant only to kill had, in one strange moment of the war, acted as an accidental scout. A malfunction had become an intelligence fragment. And the sea, unpredictable, brutal, alive with machines, had turned a simple launch into a message. This incident remains one of the overlooked curiosities of World War II naval warfare. A torpedo that vanished, returned, and pointed the way toward an enemy operating unseen in the vast Atlantic. The ocean at dawn looked calm, almost harmless, the kind of deceptive stillness sailors in the Second World War learned never to trust. The destroyer's crew stood at stations, scanning the surface as pale light spread across the swell. They were searching for something that should not have been found. Evidence of a German submarine identified not by radar, not by sonar, not by intelligence intercepts, but by a torpedo that had returned from the dark with a set of coordinates no one had programmed into it. As the destroyer cut a slow arc around the reported slick, men leaned over the rails, watching patterns of oil slide across the waves. Submarine oil had a smell that stuck to a sailor's memory. Sharp, burnt, unmistakable. This slick was thin but fresh. It wasn't conclusive proof of a kill, but it wasn't nothing either. Somewhere in the night, something had been struck or had struck something, and left a trail only a trained eye could read. Inside the ship, the recovered torpedo rested in the port maintenance bay. The casing had been opened further, and officers stood around the exposed machinery with the unease of men handling a ghost. The gyroscope, usually an unremarkable component, was now the most scrutinized object aboard. Naval technicians took measurements, copied down angles, and argued quietly in the cramped air. One technician pointed out a detail that had been overlooked: the smear of residue near the gyro setting dial. It wasn't from water, it wasn't from oil. It bore the chemical signature of exhaust byproduct, a type consistent with a diesel engine running underwater on battery fumes. German U-boats rarely surfaced unless forced to, but their engines left traces even in the depths. If the torpedo had passed through a cloud of underwater exhaust, even briefly, it might have registered a disturbance strong enough to nudge its gyro from the preset course. It wasn't proof, but it was a clue. Above deck, the destroyer accelerated again. The sea stretched endlessly, broken only by faint whitecaps and the disciplined geometry of naval reconnaissance. The ship's captain had ordered a full search grid, aggressive enough to flush out a damaged U-boat, cautious enough to avoid sailing into a trap. The Atlantic was wide, but a wounded submarine was slow and predictable. If it was still alive, it would try to slip away beneath the thermoclines. The sonar operators listened hard. Their screens and headphones crackled with static and the low heartbeat of the ocean floor. Every few minutes they rotated frequencies, probing the deep for any sign of movement. A U-boat running silent could become nearly invisible, but even silence had patterns. Pressure changes, metallic harmonics, echo shadows. Hours passed. The crew moved through the motions of wartime alertness, hyper-focused yet drained. But then, near midday, a faint noise appeared. 3 pulses, irregular, nearly swallowed by water distortion. The sonar chief froze, replayed, narrowed the filter bands, and listened again. Not whale, not debris, not the ship's own engines. This had direction. The destroyer swung toward the bearing, engines rising to combat speed. Men braced themselves as spray blasted across the bow. The ship carved through the Atlantic, closing the distance with relentless force. For a moment, the war narrowed to a single narrowing triangle: ship, signal, target. And then, it vanished. The signal dissolved into nothing. A tense silence followed. The captain ordered a full stop. Sonar swept again. No contact returned. What they found instead a few minutes later was a field of small debris, splinters, fragments of cork insulation, shards of black-painted metal. Evidence of an underwater explosion, likely several hours old. A submarine destroyed by pressure implosion or internal failure after being hit lightly. Maybe by depth charge, maybe by a malfunction, or maybe, just maybe, by the torpedo that had returned bearing its coordinates. The war left such questions unanswered. Sailors didn't need the answer to know what the sea could do. The destroyer documented the debris and logged the coordinates. Officers collected the fragments and placed them in marked crates. These would later be examined in a naval lab, categorized, and eventually filed into an archive where few would ever look again. That night, as the ship resumed its patrol route, the captain wrote another entry in the logbook. His handwriting was calm, steady. Unusual intelligence event. Torpedo returned with altered course data. Grid searched. Debris field located. Likely enemy contact. Recommended follow-up analysis by Bureau of Ships in ONI. The mention of ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, was unusual for routine torpedo failures. It meant the captain believed something more had happened. When the destroyer docked weeks later, the torpedo was removed under guard and transferred to a repair depot. Engineers stripped it down further, studying every gear, vane, and piston. They tried to force a malfunction that could replicate the altered gyro readings. None of the attempts produced the same combination of errors. Some settings drifted under stress, but never in a pattern that pointed to a precise location. The report that followed was long, technical, and deliberately vague. It suggested mechanical influence, environmental factors, possibly acoustic interference. It noted that torpedoes sometimes encountered turbulence from underwater phenomena. But in its final line it stated, "No conclusive explanation." Still, the intelligence community treated the incident differently. In a declassified post-war document, an analyst wrote, "If the torpedo intersected a submerged U-boat's wake, It may have momentarily behaved as a primitive passive sensor. In 1943, that idea bordered on science fiction. But in hindsight, as naval warfare evolved, some believed it represented an early accidental glimpse into a future where torpedoes would become seekers, listeners, machines that interpreted the sea rather than just cutting through it blindly. Weeks later, a captured German officer was interrogated. He had served on a U-boat operating in the same general region. When asked about unusual mechanical failures or near misses, he hesitated, then recalled that one submarine in his flotilla had failed to report after mid-Atlantic patrol. Its last transmission had been vague, suggesting engine trouble and unexpected acoustic disturbances. Then silence. No wreck was ever officially confirmed. In the years after World War II, naval scientists occasionally revisited the incident. Some argued the torpedo simply malfunctioned. Others believed it momentarily locked onto a trace of sound or heat. A few speculated it had run beneath a U-boat, grazing it, picking up magnetic or acoustic anomalies before dying. But the men who saw it return across the waves carried the experience for the rest of their lives. A machine built to destroy had come back, broken, sputtering, dying, but not empty. It had returned with information, with direction, with a warning. The Atlantic had whispered coordinates through the weapon's failure, and the destroyer had listened. In the broader history of WWII, this event remains a footnote, overshadowed by great battles, decisive convoys, and the vast engineering struggles beneath the surface. Yet in its small, strange way, it reflected the deeper truth of the war at sea, that amidst steel, fire, fear, and innovation, the ocean itself became an actor, shaping outcomes, bending trajectories, and carrying echoes of machines trying to find one another in the dark. The torpedo that returned to its launch point didn't just defy expectations. It forced sailors and scientists alike to question what they knew about the weapons they trusted, the enemies they hunted, and the unpredictable theater they fought in. It left behind no heroic tale, no official medal, no celebrated victory. Only a direction written in grease pencil, a smear of diesel byproduct, and a few scattered pieces of a submarine lost to the depths. But it also left a legacy, a moment where technology, chance, and the chaos of war intersected, revealing that even in the mechanized brutality of the Second World War, mystery still had a place. And decades later, in the cold language of a declassified naval report, one understated line remains the only public acknowledgement of what happened that night. Return torpedo carried anomalous coordinate data of unknown origin. A single sentence, yet beneath it lies one of the most haunting technological riddles of the war.